My guest this week is Jack Perez. Jack has directed over a dozen feature films, including indie hits Some Guy Who Kills People, which was executive produced by John Landis, La Cucaracha, the winner of the Best Feature at the Austin Film Festival, and The Big Empty, which was the winner at the AFI Film Fest for Best New Writer. He virtually invented the found footage genre with his groundbreaking first feature, America's Deadliest Home Video, and wrote and directed the pop culture classic Mega Shark vs. Giant Octopus. His television directing credits include the pilot for Universal's Xena, Warrior Princess, Fox's unauthorized Brady Bunch, The Final Days, and Sci-Fi's Blast Vegas and Drone Wars. He's a recipient of awards for both writing and directing, receiving the critical praise of Roger Ebert, Ain't It Cool News, Fangoria, The Guardian, Film Threat, the LA Weekly, Empire Magazine, the Austin Chronicle, the New York Times, and me. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Jack Perez. Hi, Jack.
Hi, Chris. Wow, that's a huge intro. I probably should have given you a shorter bio, I think. That's a really ego lifting bio.
Yeah, but you got the goods. I mean, I had, at the video store, in case people don't know, I owned a video store in Portland, Oregon called Clinton Street Video for 22 years. And I had a lot of your films on VHS and DVD. So I was familiar with your work as somebody who was just curating it, curating the store. And your film, right, Some Guy Who Kills People, just got reissued on Blu-ray.
Yeah, TerrorVision just put it out, which is cool.
Yeah, they're incredible. They're kind of like the criterion of horror movie cult fandom.
Yeah.
But the film Some Guy Who Kills People features two amazing performers who have also performed singing their own music in films. We have Barry Boswich, who was in Rocky Horror Picture Show, and Karen Black, who sang in Nashville. And I wondered if you could tell a little bit about those two performers, because they're just so iconic and mysterious to me.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought them up because, like everybody in show business goes, oh, my friend, they're talking about Robert De Niro, Bobby and I, blah, blah, blah. And it's definitely, my career has never, hasn't been like that. But with Barry and Karen, those were like two people who I was so overjoyed to get to work with them first in that one movie. And also that they came to that movie. I had no idea. In other words, I didn't pursue Barry and Karen. They actually came into audition, which was weird. So in other words, I'm auditioning actors for all these different parts for this very low budget picture, even though Landis was executive producing. The movie didn't really have much money. And people are coming in, and then all of a sudden, like Karen Black walks in, and it was as a movie nut, I had all of Karen Black's movies. I was a huge fan. So Karen Black walks in, and that was like, why are you auditioning? You can have the part, and the same thing with Barry. Barry came in, and even though I wasn't like I've seen Barry in all kinds of stuff, Megaforce. And,
oh my God!
Have you seen Megaforce?
Yeah, it was on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Incredible.
Megaforce is not to be believed, but yeah, obviously a wonderful actor. You played George Washington. I remember watching that TV movie as a kid, and I can't remember if it's War and Remembrance or Winds of War. I think it's War and No, wait, is it Winds of War?
They both sound boring.
Yeah, but he auditioned too, and was just like tore it up in the audition. And I was very fortunate enough to actually connect with both of those people. We just got along, like really well. And I did become close with both of them. And it's funny, I remember being invited to Karen's birthday party after we wrapped that movie. And Ronnie Blakely was there. And she sang and Karen sang, and Karen loved to get up and like to sing old standards, while somebody
incredible
tinkled on the ivory. And really, you could tell she was really, she considered herself a singer as well as an actor, and really committed. It wasn't like she was a dabbling singer. And Barry too, because of all of, he did Grease. He originated the Danny Zuko role on stage.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, no, he was the first Danny Zuko on stage. If you type in original cast of Grease.
Oh my God. Okay.
Wow. So he comes from theater, And even though there's no singing in Some Guy Who Kills People, I did a sci-fi movie after that, which, one of the only joys of doing that movie was actually putting Barry in the movie as a old Vegas lounge singer. And that gave him an opportunity to like sing, these old kind of like Sinatra-esque sort of standards. And that was really fun. And then again, he like takes to that, like, like a fish to water. He loves doing that. So both of them were, Barry's still alive. Karen, unfortunately, passed away, but Karen was really funny. And Barry is just a hoot. Finally got a chance to reconnect with him for this Blu-ray because I sat down and we did an interview together, and he's the same. He's just a nut, in the best way. So super cool. Like, you want them to be cool, they are.
They're just unique performers.
Yes.
They're true kind of, you can't put your finger on it, what makes them unique. They're kind of off kilter, but they deliver, and they never seem bored in the roles they're in. They just seem totally invested. I had a question about music in your films. Brought Barry in to do this part where he was a lounge singer.
Right.
When you're writing a script or, getting ready to direct a film, how do you think about music entering your process or your writing or directing?
Well, I mean, truthfully, in most cases, unless music is in the movie, like in the case of this movie, Blast Vegas, which is, again, this silly sci-fi supernatural sandstorm consumes Las Vegas, and Barry plays this sort of, a Gandalfian kind of like character who shepherds these kids through this calamity and then sacrifices himself. It's all these things. But that movie actually has a scene where he actually plays, his character is established in a club room playing piano and singing. So in that particular case, as with a musical times a million, those songs have to be written, recorded, and then playback brought to set. And of course, the actor has to learn these songs and then generally lip syncs, like a music video, as having done so many of those. But in most of the movies I've done, that music is never actually a part of the drama. The music comes in later in terms of score, and most of the stuff that I do is almost entirely orchestral score, as opposed to sort of incorporating pre-existing tune, rock or pop tunes or anything. Not
like licensed music.
Yeah, licensed music. Usually because in most cases those films just simply can't afford it. I mean, I remember thinking back on that once. I did this unauthorized Brady Bunch, The Final Days, which was a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the last episodes of the Brady, which actually was a lot of fun to do.
I bet. Did they go,
yeah,
keep on, keep on?
Well, no, I mean,
they have that scene
it wasn't in there, but I got to like build like the house and the kitchen and, the backyard. I mean, I was a Brady Bunch fan, so I got to do that. And what was funny is it was the only time where Fox produced it, because they were making these sort of rip from the headlines, sort of scandalous MOWs. And when it came to post, I was like, well, this is the middle 70s. I had all these like ideas for music licensing, and they were like, yeah. So I had the Jackson 5, I had a couple of Jackson 5 tunes in there. I had Barry White in there. I had all these, for the first time, I had like real, recognizable songs that we could license that really did sort of complete the picture. But that's probably the only instance. Everything else has been score, which is usually, truthfully, one of the last things that you do. So I generally don't go into a movie pre-thinking what the soundtrack or the score is going to be, although I probably, maybe when I was writing it or when I'm prepping it, I may be listening to things, to soundtracks or things that may ultimately, may have some influence down the road.
It's interesting that music doesn't enter your process earlier, because the film we're going to talk about, American Pop, which was directed by Ralph Bakshi in 1981, is the most forward-facing music film I've seen maybe ever, in terms of access to the original tracks by the original recording artists, and it's just nonstop, pretty much wall-to-wall music. So what brought you to this film? Why did you want to pick this film out of any film to talk about?
Well, I was, you're sort of, the sort of ground rules or the parameters of this podcast obviously have to do with music, the importance of music, or music playing a dominant role in film. And obviously, there's a load of musicals, and I think maybe now that I think about it, maybe this would be for another podcast. I think about something like Topsy Turvy, which is for me a hugely important movie.
Oh, it's incredible.
Me. That's clearly worth discussing. But I also thought of something as silly as like the '76 version of A Star Is Born with Barbra Streisand and Kris Kristofferson, because that was sort of, I saw that when I was 10, and that made a huge impression. And the music is obviously instrumental into that story. But American Pop I saw when I was 15 years old, and I had not been exposed to Ralph Bakshi's animation prior to that. Actually, I'm wondering if I did, because Lord of the Rings had come out. I did go see Lord of the Rings, but I don't think even at 15, even though I was already a movie nut, I wasn't like a Ralph Bakshi follower. I hadn't seen Wizards. I hadn't seen Fritz the Cat or Hey Good Looking.
Wait. You didn't sneak in at 15 to see an X-rated animated Fritz the Cat?
No, I saw Fritz. I wish I did. I mean, I could never get away with it. Like, I had friends who were tall. Did you ever have tall people who lower their voice and say 2 tickets for, The Hills Have Eyes? I couldn't manage to get into that.
I was so uptight. I was a total chicken shit as a teenager. I could not do that. I just was afraid of being busted. Too. And it's like, what are they going to do?
Nothing.
Call the cops?
They're not going to do
Either
anything.
A, they're going to be like, come in. We don't care. Fill the seats. Pay the price. But there was something about how uptight I was. We've talked about this before. Magazines like Fangoria and Famous Monsters and other things that showed still images of things that I wasn't allowed to see.
Yes,
was
huge.
Like my gateway into things like this. And American Pop was the same thing. I saw the trailer for it, and I was a little too young for it, and it kind of freaked me out.
Well, I mean, it kind of does. I mean, that's the thing that's so interesting. That movie, oddly, so I had seen Lord of the Rings. It didn't, even though visually it was pretty stunning, I wasn't like a Tolkien fan, so it wasn't a big experience for me.
Right.
But my parents actually made this American Pop a family movie night, which we would do from time to time in those days. They decided, like, let's go see this movie. And I actually had no idea what it was. And I don't think I was particularly even interested in the subject so much, because to me it just seemed like, what is this? This just wasn't, I mean, I was into monsters and, but what it ended up being was like a singular experience. In other words, I hadn't seen an adult animation that wasn't fantastical, that was just basically a straight ahead, essentially a drama, and a very mature and oftentimes depressing.
It's very bleak
and violent and sad
yes.
and so it was this weird combination of an adult drama playing out in this very specific form of animation, which I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time yet, but I ultimately understood it to be rotoscoping.
Can you talk a bit about what rotoscoping is?
Yeah, rotoscoping is something that Ralph Bakshi ended up using a lot of. He first used it in Wizards when he realized that he didn't have the budget to animate some of the more complex battle scenes in Wizards. So it was actually easier to take pre-existing war scenes, whether they were from World War II movies or whatever. And literally what rotoscoping is you take pre-existing film material, or you shoot live action material, and then essentially the animators trace over each individual frame. And that way you create this extremely fluid, lifelike body movement. So you're not an animator emulating somebody walking. You're actually tracing over somebody walking. And so this technique actually is pretty old. The Max Fleischer, who was responsible for Betty Boop and Popeye, and later the 1940s Superman
Oh, right.
cartoon. And even there was a movie as a kid I saw that he did called Gulliver, an adaptation of Gulliver that used rotoscoping, and he sort of patented in the 30s. And so if you look at some very particularly, if you look at Gulliver, you look at Superman, and you can see these on YouTube, Superman, there's a fluidity and a real lifelike quality that is the same quality that you get in Lord of the Rings and ultimately in American Pop, that because Ralph Bakshi was using the same technique. Funny enough, Disney, when the Fleischer's patent expired, they let it expire for some reason. Disney was like, "Great, we're going to use it." So Snow White uses rotoscoping, and so does Alice in Wonderland and Sleeping Beauty. And if you look at the movements, one of the reasons why Snow White was so huge was because there was a reality to these, at least to Snow White and Prince Charming and that whole thing. They looked real. They had a reality. It wasn't like other animation. So anyway, so this technique of tracing over live action footage, this was a technique that Bakshi used almost entirely in American Pop, and it works because you have the scene after scene of essentially just very untraditional anime. People sitting around a table talking or just hanging out in an apartment is not something that you traditionally associate with an animated movie.
Right.
And this is a lot of just like, it's supposed to be a real, squat in San Francisco, or here's somebody, this is somebody shooting heroin in their apartment, or this is,
Right.
Walking through Greenwich Park, through Washington Square late at night. This is supposed to be happening. So that, I think that look made a huge impression. But I also feel like it was just it was an emotional story, even before you even look at how the music is. Obviously, the whole movie is about this parallel between these four generations of immigrant Americans.
Yes.
And the music of the time as they go through it, and the fact that they are musical, that, the initial child, that flees from Russia with his mother, Zalmi, gets involved in vaudeville and has a knack for that and wants to be a singer. And then his son is a piano player. And then, there is this thing about the music being the only thing that matters. And I think the poster even kind of like overstates it, but it's like, all these dreams, somebody's going to be a star. So it's the idea that
Yes.
these were a family that was always sort of musically oriented and aiming toward that kind of thing.
It's a film about chance meetings and people just like either falling in love because they just fall over each other in a space, or they see each other out of the corner of the eye, or they die because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time,
Right.
or they're injured in the war because they're in the back of a pantomime horse.
Right.
It's very complicated, and in terms of just jamming all these storylines and what they want to tell about the history of America.
Yes.
Senate hearings, to war, many wars, to popular culture, to prohibition, prostitution, drug use. It's very ambitious and at times overstuffed.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that the rotoscoping technique helps soften some of that. A lot of the people that are rotoscoped are very traditional in terms of their look and dress is very brown, black, gray, white.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything in the background or surrounding them is purple faces, green hair. Very strange choices. It's very unsettling.
Yeah.
So at times reminded me of Yellow Submarine a bit. Like, we're going to heighten the senses here a bit. And also I don't know if Bakshi was thinking, oh, this is kind of a stoner film. Like, the planetarium is closed tonight, so let's get him in for American Pop while they're high.
Possibly. I mean, it's funny because I first experienced Fritz the Cat, which I think is one of the best stoner movies. Like, I can't tell you how many times I saw Fritz the Cat when I was at NYU, high as a kite.
Uh-huh.
And that movie works incredibly well when you're high. And the movie feels like you're stoned anyway. I think what's interesting about American Pop is it actually plays out as you said, is sort of this epic, often overstuffed, but epic drama that as it kind of moves into the 50s,
Yes.
and into sort of like beatnik society, and then ultimately graduates into the psychedelic 60s, it becomes like at a certain point, at like 2/3 of the way through the movie, it becomes a stoner movie, and that it's just because it's all drug related. The Tony
Yes.
character is just, and everybody is high, and so it's and to the point where his illegitimate son is a drug dealer. So
Right.
drugs sort of like from the time they kind of Tony leaves, home and goes to Kansas or whatever, it becomes a drug movie, and drugs are like a huge part of it. So the movie takes on a very specific tone. But prior to that, it's more like Godfather 2. I mean, you have this, he starts with this pogrom. It's like the Cossacks kill his father, and he escapes to America with his mother, and then his mother dies in the uh, triangle, shirtwaist factory fire,
Oh, that's intense. And it's happening really fast.
Right. It happens really fast. Yeah,
The
yeah.
film has a title sequence that is, I think it's a pretty amazing overture, a smash up of Freebird and, Glenn Miller's String of Pearls and Gershwin's I Got Rhythm and Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag,
Right.
then back into Freebird as an orchestral piece. And it was so confusing to me at first that I didn't recognize Freebird. I was like, I know what is that song? I recognize all these other things. And then
Right.
bam, the film opens with like a traditional Ukrainian track. While all this stuff is happening, there's title cards, like a
Right.
silent movie. Immediately, people are being slaughtered.
Right.
They go to Brooklyn
Right.
and basically selling chorus slips as a child to raise money for his family. The mother dies, like you said, in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
That's right.
Then he's in World War I as he grows up, and he gets shot as a pantomime horse. That breaks up his singing career because he gets a wound to the throat. And that's the first 12 minutes of the film.
Right.
It's relentless and bleak.
It is. It's emotionally relentless, and it's like you said, and it's bleak and it's violent, and in a way, that's why I was kind of like really, really taken with it as a kid, because it really was hitting me on an emotional level. And I was trying to think of adult dramas, that I had seen prior to that, and there are a couple of them which are pretty devastating. I think I had seen Apocalypse Now, and I think I had seen the Deer Hunter. So these are very heavy movies, and I think the amount of drama, of heavy drama and as you pointed out, how quickly it comes in a 90-minute movie, just keeps coming and coming and coming, that it's almost like you're overdosing on opera. You're just getting hit and hit and hit. And there are certain things that connect, like there's certain very like unforgettable moments, like when the mother dies after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and the Zalmi, as a little boy, is like kneeling over the bodies of all these poor women that have jumped or burned, and he says, "Goodbye, Mama." And suddenly he walks off with these vaudevillians that have become his sort of there's a clown juggle. I mean, it's like it's very strong, and it's not, it could be schmaltz, but it doesn't play that way. And then you hear Smiles, and it's Smiles being sung by him as a boy, and it's a little boy singing a cappella, Smiles. And there's something about that always gets me. And the image itself, the two of them walking off into these empty New York streets at night. Having grown up in New York, there's a lot of New York in that movie, and there's a lot of nighttime, empty New York. And to me, that he nails that. And Bakshi is a New Yorker, and he knows what that world is. And I think he captures that very specifically through all the kind of periods.
And I had a question about that, because when this film was made, wasn't New York still on the verge of bankruptcy in 81?
Yes. It was a garbage strewn. Yeah. Bankrupt. Yeah, it was a dirty, violent place, and and it was particularly bad in the late 70s and early 80s. Even when I ended up going to NYU in the early 80s, it was still pretty much a dangerous city. It certainly hadn't been transformed into like a tourist attraction.
Right. There was no M&M store yet.
No, there was none of that. And many people think, Ralph Bakshi is sort of like, they don't compare him to Scorsese, but in the sense that he is a New York filmmaker. His stuff is very much about, a lot of his stuff is very much about neighborhoods and the characters that inhabit those worlds. And I think also because my mother's side of the family are all Holocaust survivors and barely, I'm a first generation American, and there's something about that whole experience of fleeing Europe to come to America that speaks to me too. So there was a lot of just very, like, again, it feels very operatic.
Yes.
And in a way, as a kid, I guess I was 15 when it came out. It just landed in a way, so much so that, for example, my sister, who was even younger than me, so it may even made a bigger impression on her, named her son Ben, I think specifically after the Benny character, which is the piano player that is, killed in World War II when he's playing Lily Marlene and the German shoots him, and that whole bit. Yeah.
Every time you see a glimpse of hope, somebody's grown up, somebody's met someone, it drags you down. And I feel like the first third of the film is very successful in terms of the Godfather epic feel that you described. Around the time where somebody answers a door and there's a box and they pick it up and they're like, don't open the box, and they blow up, I was kind of like, okay, this is starting to they're jamming everything they can into it. And I felt like some of those things pulled me out, where at the beginning it was a little more eloquent. And as the film goes on,
yes,
it definitely starts unraveling, I think, in terms of its success with the story.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. And I do think that there are certain, it's interesting because there are certain sequences, like, for example, all the kind of prohibition, violence, gangster sort of, that whole sequence. And again, he doesn't shy away from that. He like dives right in. Those scenes are like very bloody, as are the World War I and the World War II sequences.
They're very grotesque.
And they're generally established by they're the most sort of music video sort of sequences where they're full blown montages, set against a particular song. Like, the World War II sequences, sing, 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 so you've got this, and it's intercutting between rotoscope stuff of like the Nicholas brothers dancing and you're intercutting. And it's also interesting because having also been raised on a lot of World War II movies, because my father was a World War II fanatic, I realized that there are certain sequences in the World War II sequence that are literally rotoscoped over pre-existing other war movies. In other words, he didn't, even though he actually shot, his actors, his principal actors, for all the drama scenes of, drama. When it comes to these big set pieces where you're seeing like, 100 guys landing at Normandy, he's rotoscoping over The Longest Day, or for the World War I movie, the World War I sequence, he's rotoscoping over like a George Papard World War I movie called The Blue Max. And I'm actually identifying like, wait, that's a shot from The Longest Day.
Did he steal that?
I think he actually stole that stuff because it was almost like an early form of sampling. I think by the time you abstract something, I don't think he was stealing entire sequences, but he's stealing shots, and he's kind of like saying, no one's going to know that I traced over this shot from The Longest Day.
Oh, that's incredible to think about that.
Yeah, because it's like, because even like I think about the World War I sequence where you talk about him he's the ass end of a horse in a vaudeville act and he gets shot through the throat. It starts with these like air-to-air aerial shots of German biplanes like descending on the USO camp where he's performing. And they also have a fluidity where you're like, wait a minute, you just didn't animate this out of the clear blue sky.
No, the camera angles are incredible.
Right. So if you think about it, like taking like the Blue Max was a very expensive World War I picture I think it was made in 1966, which has this incredible aerial dogfight stuff. If you take that stuff and you tracing over that, and then it's going to have that sweep to it or that scale. So, but I think the other thing is that I don't know how it was when you were a kid, but my parents didn't necessarily play or take the time to introduce me to important pieces of music, let alone American music. I mean, there were certain things that I grew up hearing, like, my father would like Aaron Copland, so I had that in my head. Or, there were certain bands like Bread or whatever that my mom would play, but it wasn't like, here, you should listen to, this is Benny Goodman, and this is George M. Cohan, and this is, and so I think that, or this is Gershwin or Cole Porter. And I think that this movie was also an introduction to me of a lot of very important music that I hadn't heard otherwise. Like as time goes by, I knew from Casablanca, but I didn't, I started to see, oh yeah, that's this music. And it does. And when you really look at the list, the soundtrack, it's like, there's like you said, this like a ridiculous amount of music that's been licensed for this movie.
I have a list here. Some of the artists were Gershwin, Dylan, Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Cole Porter, Louis Prima, Herbie Hancock, Dave Brubeck, Fabian, Art Blakey, Peter, Paul and Mary, Mamas and the Papas, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, Jimmy Webb, Lou Reed, Pat Benatar, Sex Pistols, Heart, and Leonard Skinner.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got, even like Scott Joplin, like I'd seen I think I'd seen The Sting, but I hadn't heard Maple Leaf Rag particularly, and they're all like, it's like, it's like you said, it's overstuffed in almost every way. But it's never boring. It's just constantly like playing on your senses, both visually and orally. It's just kind of like, beating you over the head, for 90 minutes, which I think, depending on your mood, is not a bad thing.
No, but it's funny. I think the film was really promoted as a modern rock movie.
Yes.
If you look at the soundtrack, no ragtime.
No.
It's all, Big Brother and Holding Company and Pat Benatar and Jimi Hendrix and The Doors. And
right. That's definitely how it was sold, for sure. And I think it's funny enough, that's probably why I was kind of like, how interesting is this going to be?
Right.
And it turned out that all the other stuff, all the stuff that's set, at the turn of the century and into the jazz age, to me, those are the most impressionable sequences in the movie for me. Like, I start to like lose, as a kid, I started to lose my way once it sort of really delved into heroin addiction, in the late 60s and early 70s. That's when it starts to feel like I'm out of my depth here. I don't know. I don't have any frame of reference as a 15-year-old to this world. I haven't seen it in any other movies. I mean, I had seen war represented in old movies because my father, again, he would introduce me to a lot of classic Hollywood cinema. So I had seen gangster movies, and I had seen war movies, and I had seen movies that took place, during Prohibition, and I had those references, but I had never seen somebody shooting smack in an apartment. I'd never seen somebody dragging their kid around, while he made heroin deals. To me, that was like hardcore, even though it was a piece of animation. I had forgotten all that at that point.
It's still very uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable,
The character Tony is the third generation member of this family, and he's in it the most out of any character. You spend the most time with Tony, and he's also the most unlikable character in the film and the most unsympathetic. So,
right.
Everything he does, whether he's having a one-time fling in a cornfield to have an illegitimate son who shows up later, right, or I feel like by that point in the film, it just loses the plot a bit. It starts doing that thing that I talked about earlier where it's all about chance. So, of course, you're walking down the street playing a harmonica and somebody goes, "Hey, that's pretty good, man. Why don't you come jam with us?" And then
doesn't that how it works in your world, Chris? That's like how as a songwriter.
5 minutes later, we got a record deal. And then 5 minutes later, we're the #1 band in the country. 5 minutes later, they're all addicts, and some of the dialogue in this part really made me feel like maybe they didn't do any research on the language or the culture or the actual reality of drug addiction, because they're saying lines like, "You're pulling a Houdini and she's pulling Freak Out City," and it's so corny and forced and way out. And that those sequences, if you don't know anything about drug culture and you're a kid, probably
right.
was maybe a deterrent or scared the shit out of you or whatever, because the drug sequences are long and brutal and very colorfully ugly, is the only way I can describe it. I was also really surprised that they were able to get the likeness of Jimi Hendrix in this film. When he's doing Purple Haze, it's one of the few instances where it's not some fiction character being rotoscoped singing a Janis Joplin song. It is literally Jimi Hendrix playing Purple Haze in a very like stretched out psychedelic montage.
Right.
I'm really curious how he did that, because I know he got the rights to all this music really cheap. He was able to acquire the rights to the soundtrack for under $1 million. He got all of this. People kind of trusted him with this vision and his story and his past, especially with Fritz the Cat being a cult thing. There was kind of a way in for him to be like, I'm going to do something different. I want to do an adult drama, and I want to use your music to tell it. But still, I was really surprised that the estate of Jimi Hendrix, who was notoriously tight with album releases and unreleased songs, that somehow this squeaked through.
Well, it's weird. Yeah, I think it was like you said, I think it was based on his Bakshi sort of rep as an animator, as an artist, that people just thought, well, this has got to be cool, or at least interesting. Two, I think it was limited, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was limited rights-wise to the theatrical release. And since this happened like right on the edge of home video, there's a reason why the film was basically you couldn't find it for years, because the rights were all tied up. In other words, I guess when it came down to home video and all sort of other forms of home entertainment, that had not been part of the original clearances deal. So they had to go. So they just said, forget it. We can't release it because we can't afford. We have to renegotiate with everybody.
Yes.
And I think that's ultimately what happened, because funny enough, then this is just purely coincidence. I think I actually am Facebook friends with Ralph Bakshi, and he posted something like this week that says American Pop is now out on Blu-ray, like this week.
Oh, crazy.
Which is really funny, because I mean, I don't know when this will air, but it's just, the irony is that, and it has existed. I know there was a DVD and there was I remember when the VHS came out.
Yes, I had the VHS. It came out in 1998, so a couple years after it opened, and it was a big deal.
Yeah, it's like 20 years after the movie is out, is almost 20 years. So it was out of print. I remember I had taped it when it was on HBO or something, and I remember taping it, and that's how we watched it. My sister and I used to rewatch it on our own.
That was such a rite of passage.
Yeah.
Taping stuff off cable. If you're lucky enough to have cable, that's where I was able to rewatch Fassbinder films and Fellini. They were just throwing content on there because they needed it.
That's right.
And so I remember the Stuntman seemed to be playing all the time on the movie channel.
That's an adult movie. I mean, it's
and you're really confused when you're 10,
right?
And your parents are not paying attention.
Yeah,
and I feel like I can imagine you at a young age also trying to put this story together. But I think it's amazing that it affected your family.
One of two things happens when you see a movie as a kid, and it like changed your life, and then you look at it as an adult, and if it's unfortunately, sometimes you can look at those movies and see it through different eyes, an adult's eyes, all of a sudden, and recognize, well, wait a minute, this is not very good, or this is not what I remembered it to be. But I think with American Pop, it has like quasi, because it's animated, because the format is what it is, because it's trying to do so much in such a weird way that it sustains this sort of dreamlike quality. And there are certain, like you said, there are certain things that are corny. There are certain things that don't quite work. There's certain lines of dialogue that don't seem to be authentic. And yet, still, as an overall, it still triggers those things in me. It's funny because, like Valerie, my wife, I tried to show it to her a couple of times, and even today, in anticipation of our sitting down to talk about it, I said, yeah, let's look at the opening. And it's amazing. She just had this absolutely, like, she just finds it repellent. She's like, this is just ugly. This, I don't like the colors. I don't like the illustrations. The way they're using the music is stupid. And Valerie comes, I tried to show her a bit of the Sex Pistols bit because Valerie was part of the punk scene. She was part of hardcore, when it was hardcore in the early 80s. And she was like, this is bullshit. This is not.
Yes.
And in a way, she's kind of right, because, that certainly wasn't my experience. I mean, like, for me as a little kid who like I recognize Pat Benatar. I was like, that's edgy. Like, that's Pat Benatar.
Yeah. Hell's for Children.
Yeah. Sex Pistols to me was like, I wasn't going near that shit at that age.
Right. That's devil's music.
But yeah, it's all time and place. It's like that movie just hit at a certain time where I was ready to be moved by that kind of thing, and it just kind of popped into my head because I hadn't thought about it in a long time until you kind of brought up the format of your show. So,
well, there's a couple things as the film starts to close out. I guess you call it the third act, with Tony and his illegitimate son just happens to show up backstage and says to his dad, teach me how to write songs, you know, and then they're all sudden cut to them in a bleak New York City. Well, first he has a freak out in a cornfield, and that is a very upsetting scene.
Very upsetting scene. Well, isn't it set to summertime, right? Isn't it? I think it's Janis Joplin singing Summertime, which that combination by itself, that's a very powerful song. When you juxtapose that over a junkie realizing that he's been a father all these years and left this poor woman with a child, and who knows, and the performance by Ron Thompson, who plays both Tony and Pete grown up. He voices both of those characters. He's howling like in agony, whether it's a combination of realizing what he's done and also being out of his mind on drugs. But again, as a kid, watching this adult sort of have a flipping out, howling in pain, emotional pain, while Janis Joplin wails Summertime, is pretty fucked up,
Yeah, it's really an effective, upsetting scene, and I too have a visceral reaction to this film. I'm not drawn into the colors or the choice of animation, and even Bakshi talked about rotoscoping is really hard to get the emotional content right. So there's often a distance to some of the emotion and some of the facial movements or things that you want to see happen in a scene, because it's kind of gelatinous and it's melting and it's moving and fluctuating. But that scene kind of slows everything down. He's moving in slow motion and he's just like in a silent scream, and it's kind of just circling him. It's really effective. I thought it was one of the better scenes, especially with the Tony character.
Well, it's interesting. I think you bring up an interesting point, because the slowness of that moment, actually, I think the rotoscoping, because I think what he's referring to is that, you can trace movement, physical movement, which is why, again, like Snow White moves the way she does, and Sleeping Beauty and Alice in Wonderland moves the way, and they move very realistically. Yet the faces of those Disney characters remain more of a illustration quality. They're not meant to be anatomically authentic. And so when you juxtapose physical movement with a traditional animated face, that actually is more believable than trying to duplicate the inflection in a human face by tracing it. I think that's what he's talking about. It's like, which is why I think in the best, most emotional moments in American pop actually come when people are passive. where it's just somebody looking, where they're actually not moving at all, which just happens in life, when someone is frozen or someone is thinking about something. And that's when the power of the actual illustration, the power of just an individual frame actually communicates more than, rippling, flesh or whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
It's still better than it's still, I think, more effective than the uncanny valley effect, which happens when you see stuff like, I just watched the first 25 minutes of the new Indiana Jones movie, which they were raving about the de-aging and Val and I were watching this, and it was just like, what the fuck is this? It's like, no, it does not work. It's not real. It's like a weird dead. It's a cross between watching, somebody else play a video game,
Right.
but it's not a living person. It's a mask of somebody, no matter how, photographically authentic it is. It isn't a living person.
Right.
So it's weird. I think rotoscoping can actually, because it's cell animation, gets away from that a little bit. It's not like it's asking you to believe it's an actual photograph of something. When you do get into that they still, whether it's The Irishman or, with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and a number of other things, it's not there yet. And I do think that's like, I think it's, it doesn't quite work. So
yeah, is it going to be the de-aging of Harrison Ford or the rotoscoping of Harrison Ford? It's a hard one to pick out. They're both kind of evil things. I don't want to see. Well, if you're not into spoilers, you've only had 42 years to watch this film. So either skip this or stick it out, because I want to talk about the ending of this film. So Tony asks his son, Pete, if he can hawk his guitar to, go get drugs. And then Pete just sits alone on a bench in New York City, waiting. Night comes, day comes. Then somebody shows up and says, hey, Pete? Yeah? Your dad wanted to give you this, and it's a package of heroin.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives him drugs to sell.
And then a crossfade of Pete as an adult. And he
ages, and suddenly now he's a man. Right.
Yes, and he's kind of a blonde-haired Lou Reed type.
Right.
And then during a montage of the Sex Pistols, which is interesting, it's the only track on the soundtrack that was not a licensed version. That's not the Sex Pistols doing that song.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
I think that's what Valerie was responding to. She says, that's not that. That's not, exactly.
So it's funny that the Sex Pistols still were like, no.
No, Sex Pistols were
kind of incredible, which I think is really amazing that they're the one band who are still like, no way.
Right.
And he's dealing drugs to all the punk rockers and the new wavers, and he's kind of the coolest person around. And then he shows up in a recording studio all of a sudden, which is the actors. You know who that is in the film playing the punk rockers?
No. No, actually, well, it's like Fear, right?
It is. It's the band Fear. Yeah. So like Leaving and Durf, Scratch, I can't remember all their names. Spit Sticks. Right. I'm getting close to knowing all their names. And he's there to deal the drugs, but he's like, give me a shot. I want to play you a song. And they're like, nah. And he's like, well, I'm out of here with this stuff. Like, no, come back.
Right.
So this cool looking,
I know where you're going with this.
Lou Reed-esque guy who's with this punk band who is Fear goes over to the piano.
And he plays.
And what does he play?
Yeah, it's not what you would expect. Night Moves.
He plays Night Moves by Bob Seger.
Right.
And it's so out of context. It
doesn't work at all.
It doesn't work at all.
And it's been building, the whole movie is building to one of these people is going to be a star.
Yes.
And this is going to be the song. This is the song.
There's these really haunting still watercolors, I can't tell, they show these producers who are like fat cat producers just standing there or sitting there behind the glass in the control booth. No motion. It's just a painting with their mouth open, listening to the song. Then it cuts back to him animated doing it. And then it cuts to them, and one of them standing up pointing like we've got a hit kind of vibe.
Right. That's right.
Cut to him playing a place as big as Madison Square Garden.
Right.
Just, he's on stage. He's a star, like immediately after playing a song. And he does a medley of songs. What does this cool punk new rocker heroin seller do? His medley is Carl Perkins' Blue Suede Shoes, then Devil with the Blue Dress, and Heart's Crazy on You is the mashup. Again, I was like, you blew it. Like, this is like, in terms of the story and believability and wanting to care about something, it was so, I couldn't tell if they were running out of
music
money in terms of being like, well, we need to wrap this up. We can only afford a 91-page script. So we gotta finish this up. We gotta finish it up. And Heart's popular. Let's put him in. But that this person
doesn't fit the character. No.
And it's just, it deflates the premise of the film. Everyone's working and dying and suffocating and just so much drama. And then it's just
night moves.
Hey, it's so easy. I just showed up in the studio and I just showed him the song, and it really deflated all this Vietnam footage of assassinations.
Yeah, it's pretty simplistic. It's yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, yes. I mean, when you think about it, the believability of just, him getting his shot. I mean, I guess, I don't know, but maybe I was led to believe that as a possibility. I don't know whether it's A Star Is Born or the Muppet movie. It's like, I guess everybody's got one song, and if they play it, if it's the right moment, then you'll be a star, kind of thing. And, and it happens in movies, and it happens, it happens here. But I think you're right. I think one of the reasons why it doesn't work on top of that is that it is Bob Seger. It's funny because I think I remember reading an interview with Bakshi where he talked about, like, I fucking hate Seger. I hate that it was night moves. It shouldn't have been night moves. And I think he was actually explaining just what you said. It's like, we ran out of money and we couldn't get what he wanted, which I never knew exactly what he wanted it to be. But It does feel like, and then, by the way, he had to commit to it. I mean, he commits to it because it's a rotoscoped performance, of night moves. And it's some night moves. It's just not. Yeah, you're a heroin dealer and you're singing Bob Seger, kind of
to Fear, or the equivalent. Like, hey, give this a chance, and like the band all of a sudden is gonna be like, this mohawked weirdo band's gonna be like, yeah, all right,
awesome, yeah, that's great. It's true.
It brings up a question that I wanted to ask in terms of this as a film that is, music drives this film in terms of its storytelling and the montage and the highs and lows of this 4-generation story. Are there any songs that you could imagine could have been in this film that would have been a better representation than what they put in?
That's a good question. Actually, I can't think of, at least for the first 2/3 of the movie, I can't think of I can't think of anything that would communicate the time or place better than what kind of paints that whole from like 1910 through the 50s. I guess when you get into the 60s and the 70s, there's so much more that could be experimented with. There's no Zeppelin, there's no Beatles, there's no I mean, you do get specific stuff like Lou Reed, like you pointed out, and you do get like something like Summertime, is very powerful. But no, I just think I had the same reaction as you did. I feel like it just sort of petered out at the end with the wrong choices. And I think, I mean, I guess the key thing is that if the movie does sort of completely explode at the night moves, point? What could he have played? I would put that to you. You're the like, what would you put in there?
Well, the thing is, the film is not full of obscure tracks.
Right. No, they're known.
The film is made so that even if you don't know a jazz song, Dave Brubeck.
That's right. Exactly.
Even if you don't know folk, Peter, Paul, and Mary,
right,
and Dylan. And even with the ragtime stuff, it is the most iconic, popular representation
Correct.
of these artists. So, your heart goes, oh, that'd be cool if it was a Gang of Four song,
right.
But in terms of what it could do, I think a Lou Reed song would have been kind of amazing, or a Bowie song.
Yeah. Well, that would make him true. Like if it was a Bowie song, that would like make sense in terms of, like, what you want is something that transcends almost everything that's come before.
Yes.
And also is believable in that he's been so heavily influenced by drug culture that it's in him.
Yes.
It's in his DNA. So that should all come out. You're right. That should all come. I mean, with Bowie, it would come out in a more loving, sort of benevolent way. He is a kind of a dangerous character. So the question is there a Bowie equivalent? I guess Lou Reed,
right, American equivalent, right?
Iggy, I guess it would have to be like Iggy. Would it be Iggy Pop or something like that?
Yeah, maybe Iggy Pop.
Like something that has an edge.
But yeah, that's what I would say. Something that also feels like East Coast New York. I mean, right. Iggy Pop's from the Midwest, but still.
Or Jim Carroll, or even Jim Carroll. Like if it had, if he had, like that.
Yes, that would have been really cool.
The Jim Carroll band as an ending would have been like, that fits almost exactly with that character.
Absolutely. That's really a good thought. Jim Carroll would have been fantastic because he was a poet.
Right.
He was a New Yorker guy. Music had a lot of energy, mm-hmm. and also it was very, it was real-time drug
right.
Action
right.
in terms of who he was.
That would have been better.
Yeah, that's amazing. We cracked it.
We solved it. I should just message Ralph Bakshi now and go, can you just put in Jim Carroll instead?
He'd probably be, yes, on it. Yeah. Take the Blu-rays off the shelf. Well, I always end every interview with the same question, but I tailor it to the movie. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many #1 hit songs do you give this film if Pete had to write them? Does he get 1 hit or up to 10 hits? He's got the goods.
All right, so I would give it a 7. I would give it a 7 out of 10.
7 hit songs from Pete.
Yes.
He seems like he's got that in him.
Yeah, but that's just, it's a very subjective thing. I might even give it an 8, but that's because it's me, like for somebody else, like my wife, yes. She would give it a 0, so it's, but yes, that's what I think.
Well, thank you so much, Jack. This was great. Thanks so much for doing this.
Oh, no. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, the last thing I expected to do was sort of get into the nitty gritty of a movie I saw when I was 15, but I'm glad your format actually allowed for that. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. I'll see you soon.
My pleasure. See you, man.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday, so be sure to search for the show on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the show. And if you've enjoyed this, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate and review it as well. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!